Something strange keeps happening in relationships nobody talks about. The person who fears closeness, the one who pulls away, the one who says they need space, freedom, distance. That person cannot seem to stay gone. Not when a super empath is involved. They leave, they go silent, they build walls that look impossible to climb, and still, they look back, they hover, they return in ways that confuse everyone, including themselves. This is the paradox. Avoidants are wired to escape emotional intensity, yet super empaths create a connection so powerful that walking away feels like losing oxygen. It sounds dramatic, but psychology shows it is painfully real. There is a hidden mechanism at work, a loop of attachment, fear, validation, and exposure. Most people only see the surface behavior. They see mixed signals, they see ghosting, they see sudden comebacks. What they do not see is the inner storm that keeps the avoidant tied to the very person they are trying to escape. And once this storm starts, detachment becomes almost impossible. Even when they swear it is over, even when they try to replace the empath, even when pride tells them never to return, something keeps pulling them back. Tonight, that something becomes clear. In this video, the hidden psychology behind the obsession will be broken down step by step. You will understand why distance increases attachment instead of killing it. You will see why super empaths become unforgettable in the mind of an avoidant. You will learn why the moment the empath finally lets go is often the moment the avoidant begins to chase. There are biological triggers involved. There are childhood patterns replaying themselves. There are ego wounds that flare up like alarms. And there is one rarely discussed truth that changes everything once you see it. Super empaths do not only give love, they create emotional exposure. For someone who survives by staying guarded, exposure feels dangerous, but it also feels intoxicating. That combination is where obsession is born. Most advice online reduces this dynamic to simple phrases: commitment issues, fear of intimacy, bad timing. Those explanations are comfortable, they are easy to repeat. They are also incomplete, because if fear alone controlled avoidance, they would leave and never look back. Yet they look back constantly, through texts they do not send, through social media searches late at night, through memories that refuse to fade, through sudden reappearances that shock the empath who was finally starting to heal. This is not random. It is a psychological bind, a push and pull between terror and longing, and the super empath sits at the center of it, often without realizing the depth of the impact they made. By the end of this video, the confusion starts to make sense. The hot and cold behavior, the disappearing acts, the strange magnetism that survives breakups, the obsession that grows in silence. You will also discover why many avoidants think they want freedom, only to feel trapped by the loss of the one person who truly understood them. Understanding brings power, because when you can see the mechanism, you stop blaming yourself. You stop chasing explanations that lead nowhere. You finally understand why logic never seemed to apply to this connection. There is a reason, and it runs deeper than love. Stay with this until the end, because the final piece explains why some avoidants return years later, still emotionally attached, even after building entirely new lives. Yes, years. Time does not always break this bond. Sometimes it strengthens it. The ending will connect every behavior back to one core psychological truth most people miss. Once it clicks, the pattern can never be unseen. Welcome to the channel. If understanding human behavior, attachment, and the hidden forces behind relationships matters to you, press subscribe and join us for more deep dives like this. Now let us begin. An avoidant is someone who learned very early that closeness can be risky. Connection does not always feel warm to them. Sometimes it feels demanding, heavy, hard to manage. So they build a different strategy for staying safe. They rely on themselves. They solve problems alone. They keep their private world protected. Independence becomes more than a preference. It becomes armor. To other people, they can look calm and confident, even strong. They might seem like they do not need much from anyone. But underneath that strength is a nervous system that gets overwhelmed fast. Too many feelings, too many expectations, too much vulnerability. When emotions rise, their instinct is not to move closer. It is to step back. Distance brings relief. Space brings quiet. Control returns. This is why intimacy can feel confusing for them. Part of them wants connection. They like companionship. They enjoy being valued. Yet the moment things become intense, alarms start going off inside. They may not even understand why. They just know they need room to breathe again, so they withdraw. They might focus on work, on hobbies, on anything that restores a sense of autonomy. From the outside, it can seem cold, as if they suddenly stopped caring. Inside, it feels like survival, because when they are not in control of emotional distance, they feel exposed. And exposure to an avoidant can feel unbearable. Not because they lack feelings, but because they often feel too much and do not know where to place it. A super empath moves through relationships in a very different way. They do not just notice emotions, they absorb them. The tone in someone's voice, a small change in posture, a pause between words, all of it carries meaning. Their intuition works fast. Almost instantly, they can sense when something is wrong, even if nothing has been said. Pain rarely hides from them. Where others might miss the signal, the super empath feels it like a wave, direct, personal, important. This makes them incredibly compassionate. When they see someone struggling, their instinct is not to retreat, it is to step forward. They want to understand, they want to comfort, they want to make things better. Another person's hurt can feel like their responsibility, not because they are asked to fix it, but because their heart pulls them there automatically. They often become safe places for wounded people, easy to talk to, easy to open up to, hard to lie to. Their presence invites honesty. At times, they can sense emotions that even the other person has not fully admitted to themselves. They notice contradictions, they feel buried fear, they pick up on silent longing, and instead of running from it, they stay. They offer patience, they offer warmth, they offer a kind of loyalty that can feel rare. Walking away is not their first move. Understanding is. Even when they are hurt, they try to see the deeper reason behind the behavior. They search for the wound beneath the reaction, and once they see it, their desire is to heal, not abandon. When an avoidant and a super empath meet, something unusual begins to form. On the surface, they look completely different. They respond to stress in opposite ways. They read closeness through different lenses. Yet the connection often ignites fast. The avoidant feels the empath's warmth, the lack of judgment, the quiet understanding. It feels comforting, inviting, safer than expected. At the same time, the super empath senses depth in the avoidant. Hidden emotion, unspoken history, mystery pulls them in. Where some people would back away, the empath leans forward. They want to know more. They want to reach the part that stays guarded. So a dance begins. When tension rises, the avoidant steps back, almost automatically. They might need silence. They might disappear into their own world. They might minimize what they feel. But distance does something powerful. It activates the empath, not in a dramatic way, in a caring way. They move closer with reassurance, with questions, with presence. The more one retreats, the more the other approaches. And instead of breaking the connection, this pattern can intensify it. Every reunion feels charged. Every moment of closeness feels earned. Emotion grows quickly in this environment. Longing builds. Relief becomes addictive. Attachment tightens. Both people start to occupy each other's thoughts more than they expected. Neither of them planned for this, but the push and pull creates momentum, and momentum can feel a lot like destiny when hearts are involved. The moment an avoidant begins to create distance, a shift happens in the super empath. They feel it immediately, the change in energy, the drop in warmth, the sudden quiet. For many people, this would be a sign to step back. For the super empath, it is a signal to lean in. They do not move closer because they feel small. They move closer because they care. Concern rises inside them. They wonder what went wrong. They wonder what pain just surfaced. They want to soothe it before it grows. So they reach out. They offer reassurance. They open conversations. They try to create safety again. To outsiders, it can look like chasing. But inside the empath, it feels like love in action. It feels natural, almost necessary. They believe connection can be repaired with understanding. What they often do not realize is how this response lands on the avoidant. Part of the avoidant feels relief. Someone is still there. Someone is not giving up. Someone sees beyond the withdrawal. But another part feels pressure building. More attention, more emotion, more exposure. Two opposite reactions begin happening at the same time: gratitude and fear. The avoidant may not say this out loud. They may not even fully recognize it. Yet the emotional pursuit starts to stir something deep. It touches old wounds about worthiness, about being chosen, about being important to someone. And those wounds are powerful triggers, because beneath the desire for space, there is still a human need to matter. When the empath tries harder, that need gets activated in a way that is difficult to ignore. Avoidants are used to moving through the world with protective layers. They know how to keep conversations light, how to redirect attention, how to hide the parts of themselves that feel too vulnerable to share. For a long time, this strategy works. People see what the avoidant allows them to see. strength, independence, composure. Very few notice what sits underneath. Then a super empath enters the picture, and the usual defenses start to weaken. The empath hears the hesitation behind certain words. They notice the emotion that flashes across the face and disappears. They sense sadness, hidden behind humor. Without trying to invade, they understand. Gently, accurately, consistently. The avoidant may deny it at first. They might laugh it off. They might change the subject. But part of them knows something unusual is happening. Someone is reading between the lines. Someone is responding to feelings that were never spoken out loud. It can feel unsettling, even frightening. Because when you survive by staying guarded, being understood feels like standing in bright light. There is nowhere to hide. At the same time, there is relief. No performing, no pretending, no constant effort to maintain distance. For perhaps the first time, another person sees the fear, the longing, the confusion, and they stay. The avoidant starts to feel recognized at a depth they are not used to. It reaches places inside them that rarely receive attention, places they learn to manage alone. Now someone else is there, touching those spaces with care, and the experience can be both terrifying and incredibly intimate at once. Even as avoidants pull back, a quiet fear begins to grow. They want space. They need distance to feel safe. The thought of being overwhelmed triggers instinctive retreat. Yet at the same time, something inside resists complete separation. They sense that the super empath is not like anyone else. Not someone who merely listens, not someone who tolerates the walls they put up, but someone who truly understands. This understanding is rare, almost impossible to replace, and suddenly, the very thing that drives them away becomes the thing they cannot risk losing. The mind starts racing. What if this person leaves for good? What if someone else steps in and fills the space the empath occupies? What if they never feel this level of recognition again? Panic creeps in, not loud, but insidious, a quiet tension that sits just beneath the surface. The avoidant begins to feel conflicted. Part of them whispers, "I need distance, I need control." Another part screams, "Do not let this go, do not lose them." Even their body reacts. Tension in the chest, unease in the stomach, sleepless nights filled with what-ifs and silent regrets. And yet they rarely act in obvious ways. The fear does not always come out as words. It often shows up in small behaviors, lingering texts, checking social media, subtle attempts to reconnect without revealing panic. The push and pull intensifies. The more space they seek, the more this fear anchors them to the very person they are trying to escape. It is a paradox that feels impossible to navigate. The closer they try to get away, the more they feel tethered, and that tension becomes the heartbeat of obsession. The cycle between an avoidant and a super empath can start to feel like a strange kind of addiction. One moment the avoidant is close. They share glimpses of themselves, brief windows of vulnerability. The empath feels relief, connection, hope. Then suddenly they pull away. Silence, distance, emotional walls rise again. The shift can feel jarring, like a door slamming shut after it was barely open. This pattern repeats, over and over. The brain begins to notice the highs and lows. Close moments trigger a rush. The empath feels deeply seen. The avoidant feels a fleeting connection that is rare and intoxicating. Withdrawal triggers stress. Absence creates longing. The brain starts to chase the reward. Every return, every small act of attention feels amplified. Even tiny gestures, a message, a glance, a brief smile, become significant. The unpredictability makes it more powerful. The less consistent the avoidant is, the more the empath's attention spikes. The moments of connection feel earned, rare, and precious. For the avoidant, the same loop is at work in reverse. They push away to feel control. They pull back, but secretly monitor. Each response from the empath, each act of understanding, reinforces their importance. The emotional seesaw creates tension and release, excitement and fear mixed together. The brain interprets this as something it cannot resist. The loop becomes self-sustaining. Even when logic tells them to let go, the emotional pattern keeps pulling them back. What starts as normal attachment slowly transforms into a cycle that mimics obsession. The highs feel electric, the lows feel unbearable, and the unpredictability ensures that neither can fully let go. The super empath brings something the avoidant rarely experiences: patience, understanding, non-judgmental attention. These are small gestures, but they carry enormous weight. For someone used to keeping walls up, even a moment of true acknowledgement feels like a gift. The avoidant notices it. They notice that the empath listens without criticism, that they see beyond the mask, that they seem to care without demanding. It touches something deep inside, a part of them that rarely feels recognized, rarely feels chosen. For the avoidant, this is more than comfort. It feeds the ego, not in arrogance, but in validation. They feel seen in a way that makes them feel important. It reinforces their value. It reassures the part of them that fears rejection. And the more the empath provides this, the more the avoidant craves it. Each act of understanding becomes emotional supply. Every kind word, every patient gesture reinforces the bond. It feels like safety, but also like power. A quiet kind of influence the empath may not even realize they hold. The avoidant begins to associate their sense of worth with the presence of the empath. The withdrawal of attention feels threatening. The return of attention feels rewarding. This dynamic creates a subtle cycle. The empath gives freely. The avoidant absorbs. The bond deepens. Even without conscious awareness, the brain starts linking validation to obsession. Feeling special becomes intertwined with feeling attached, and feeling attached becomes impossible to ignore. In this way, the simple acts of empathy and patience fuel the magnetic pull between them. It is no longer just about connection or care. It becomes about being recognized, valued, and uniquely chosen. Even the most patient super empath has limits. For a long time, they can absorb the intensity of the avoidance push and pull. They can offer understanding when walls rise. They can provide reassurance when distance creates anxiety. They can tolerate the cycles of hot and cold because they believe in connection, in healing, in the possibility of the avoidant showing up fully. But patience is not infinite. Compassion has boundaries. At first, they might not even notice the strain. They focus on the moments when the avoidant opens up, when connection flickers. They see potential. They see a chance to help someone feel safe for the first time. And they hold on to that hope, hoping that consistency will eventually appear. Over time, patterns become clear. Repeated withdrawal. Repeated emotional distancing, repeated testing of boundaries. The empath begins to feel drained. It is not just emotional exhaustion, it is a subtle erosion of energy, motivation, and emotional clarity. The push and pull that once felt magnetic now feels like weight. Small victories are fleeting. Moments of intimacy are interrupted by sudden disappearances. The cycle of hope and loss becomes taxing. The empath begins to realize something crucial. Their efforts do not guarantee change. Their patience does not create consistency. Their understanding does not force the avoidant to confront fears or take responsibility for the connection. When the breaking point arrives, it is often quiet, not explosive, not dramatic. A shift occurs in energy rather than words. They stop chasing. The texts become less frequent. The calls go unanswered. The emotional supply they once gave so freely is held back. It can feel strange to the avoidant. Suddenly, the balance has shifted. They no longer control the pace of connection. They no longer dictate when attention is given. The empath steps back in a way that feels deliberate yet calm. This detachment is not rooted in anger. It is rooted in survival, in the recognition that continued overinvestment drains the heart, that caring too much without reciprocity is destructive. The empath's energy, once focused entirely on understanding and healing, now moves inward. Boundaries are reinforced. Emotional self-preservation becomes the priority. They protect themselves from repeated cycles that offer temporary highs but long-term exhaustion. For the avoidant, this shift can be destabilizing. For years, the dynamic revolved around the empath responding, chasing, and sustaining connection. Now that pattern disappears, panic can surface, confusion, a subtle urgency to re-establish the bond. What was once taken for granted, the presence, patience, and unwavering attention of the empath, is now scarce, and scarcity triggers desire. The avoidant begins to notice the value of what they might lose. The energy shift is palpable. The empath is no longer feeding the cycle. They are stepping outside of it. The dynamic changes without a word. The magnetism that held the avoidant in place weakens, but not entirely, because absence unpredictably can create a new type of attachment. The empath's break signals a turning point. It forces the avoidant to confront the consequences of their avoidance. It forces them to recognize that connection is not infinite. It forces them to face the reality that emotional supply is a gift, not a guarantee. And for the empath, this detachment is a reclamation of self. They regain energy, clarity, and emotional space. They no longer bend to the avoidance rhythms. They choose boundaries over exhaustion, consistency over chaos. In this quiet withdrawal, the super empath is no longer defined by how much they can give. They are defined by what they protect in themselves. The bond between the avoidant and the empath shifts profoundly at this point. The dynamic that once revolved around pursuit and pull begins to fracture. The avoidant senses the change immediately. The balance of power, attention, and emotional influence tilts. And this is where obsession often intensifies, not because the avoidant feels love alone, but because they realize what was once freely available is no longer guaranteed. The empath's breaking point creates a vacuum that the avoidant's mind and heart cannot easily ignore. It is in this energy shift that the next stage of the psychological cycle begins. When the super empath finally steps back, when patience runs out and emotional supply is no longer freely given, something shifts deep inside the avoidant. For months or even years, they were used to controlling the rhythm of the relationship. They pulled away, created distance, and maintained a sense of independence. They could leave when it became overwhelming, and they could return when it felt safe. Suddenly, that balance disappears. The empath no longer reacts to withdrawal with reassurance. The chase, once fueled by the empath's attention, stops. At first, the avoidant may feel confused. They expect the familiar pattern of push and pull, of space followed by pursuit. But when that pattern is broken, it creates tension that is hard to ignore. Part of them experiences relief at the freedom to continue their distance. Part of them experiences an almost visceral panic. The absence of attention awakens a new kind of longing, not necessarily love in the romantic sense, not necessarily desire for intimacy as they might consciously define it, but a deep, urgent need to restore what is missing. This urgency comes from recognition. The avoidant realizes the empath is not replaceable in the ways they thought were possible. No one else understands them like this. No one else notices their hidden emotions. No one else provides the same sense of validation and emotional recognition. Fear of loss becomes immediate and consuming. It is no longer abstract. It is not a distant possibility. It is happening in real time. The brain reacts to this sudden deprivation like it would react to withdrawal from an addictive substance. Emotional highs and lows that once created attachment now create obsession. The unpredictability, the scarcity, and the perceived value of the empath's attention trigger a mental and emotional compulsion. The avoidant begins to watch more closely. They notice small details, subtle signals, anything that could indicate the empath's willingness to reconnect. Every interaction, no matter how minor, is magnified in importance. Messages, social media posts, mutual friends, everything becomes a potential clue. Their mind runs scenarios. They plan approaches, test boundaries, consider timing, and the emotions behind these actions are not always clear to them. They may confuse anxiety with desire, loneliness with love, fear of abandonment with genuine affection. The urgency is less about the relationship itself and more about restoring the balance of control and emotional supply they once took for granted. They crave the familiar rhythm, the interplay of attention and withdrawal, validation and retreat. Even as they push themselves to reconnect, they may still feel conflicted. Part of them still fears closeness, still wants independence, still wants to maintain distance. But the compulsion to pursue, triggered by the empath's detachment, becomes stronger than the desire to escape. This pursuit is often silent at first, subtle, strategic, almost invisible. It can manifest as monitoring, checking, small messages, indirect contact. The avoidant tests whether the empath will respond. Every small sign of acknowledgement reignites the loop. The avoidance that once protected them now feels like a threat to something they suddenly realize they cannot live without. The absence of attention amplifies desire. The unpredictability intensifies obsession. Even if they do not fully understand it, their mind and body are reacting to a pattern built over years of attachment, push, pull, and intermittent reward. The empath's detachment does not just create longing, it creates fixation, and this fixation can override logic, restraint, and prior intentions. The avoidance pursuit is no longer a choice. It becomes a reaction, not always driven by love, but driven by urgency, necessity, and the desperate need to regain what feels lost. The emotional intensity becomes palpable. Every thought, every action, every decision is colored by the absence of the person who once provided unwavering understanding. The dynamic flips. The avoidant, who once withdrew to protect themselves, now chases with a relentless focus that mirrors the very attachment patterns they feared. The cycle that once revolved around retreat and reassurance now revolves around pursuit and craving. Obsession is born not from intimacy alone, but from the sudden, irreversible recognition of what is no longer within reach. Inside the avoidant, a storm quietly rages. They crave connection. They long for closeness, for recognition, for someone to understand them without judgment. These desires are real, intense, and often hidden even from themselves. At the same time, they fear it. Connection brings vulnerability, exposure, the risk of being hurt, rejected, or losing control. The very things they worked so hard to avoid suddenly feel unavoidable. This creates mental chaos. Thoughts race in circles. Should they reach out? Should they pull back? Every choice feels both right and wrong at the same time.